Hi everyone, it's my great privilege to be having a conversation today with Dr. Suresh Kana, who is avid supporter of corporate governance in South Africa and is also very passionate about corporate social responsibility. Welcome, Dr. Kana.
Thank you very much.
So before we go into the conversation, I wanted to just give you a quick overview of Dr. Kana's very impressive resume, which if I have to go through everything, we'll sit here all day. So I wanted to just give you an overview and start off with saying that we are very privileged to have him here because he really is a thought leader in the fields of corporate governance as well as corporate social responsibility. And that is evident through the work that he does in the industry. He currently chairs the King Committee, which is the corporate governance focus, and he's also the chairman of the Audit Committee of the United Nations World Food Programme. Dr. Suresh is also an independent non-exec director for a number of boards. He serves as the director of the board as well as the deputy director, and he is also the director of the audit committees. So various roles that he fulfills in industry, and I'm very privileged to be having this conversation with him today. So I'm going to go into the first question, which is probably the hardest one. How would you describe the current local and global risk landscape as well as outlook?
Nicola, before we go there, I think I just want to thank IRMSA for having me here and for all the work that IRMSA contributes to the King, to corporate governance in terms of the King report and that. But coming to your question, I think it's important to understand context first, because risks change from year to year. It's variable. But there's certain mega trends that are taking place in the world, which underpin all of these risks. And they may be different for companies, they may be different from year to year. Firstly, we're moving from a world where there's the chain of command, or the authoritarian world is kind of disappearing. We're moving into a world of what I call a web of connection. And the Internet of Things is part of this whole exercise. So this facilitates things like social networks, democracy, all of those kind of things. So that's the first one. We're also moving from a world of competition to a world of collaboration. Because if you think about all the major challenges that the world faces, no country and no nation can sort them out themselves on their own. Think about climate change, think about peace, think about structural inequality. It's an issue everywhere in the world. So if you look at it, then the other side is you think about the world has been about shareholder primacy till now, right? And that debate is only arising. We've been doing that, talking about stakeholder primacy for a number of years. But that debate is just coming up in the Western world, particularly in the US now. And that has a different impact on how risks turn out and how organizations govern themselves. Also, we're having a mindset move from elitism to populism, right? And that's driven by things like structural inequality, because that's just what the world is about at the moment. The have-nots are just so many, and that's where one of the fundamental issues are arising. And one of the fundamental things that's arising out of that is the lack of institutional respect. Our institutions are almost the lowest in terms of history, in terms of trust. So that's a very, very key thing. And one of the very, very key things that I really like to see, and that I'm seeing, is the move from greed to green. That's fantastic. It's a great development. But you know, when you look at all of these things, they're all taking place at warp speed. Now, if you look at the World Economic Forum report just a year ago, if you looked at the top 10 risks, most of them were around climate change. And in a year, it's now all about COVID, sustainability, economic sustainability. That's what it's all about now. So with the watershed event that COVID has been, it really has changed everything, right? Particularly for the short term. Where now every employer, every company, every economy is thinking about their sustainability and anxious about the sustainability. An employer is concerned about his career, about his future development. Supply chains are critical, and a lot of them have become paralyzed. Now, you can imagine the impact of that on risk within organizations. Choices have had to be made between lives and livelihoods. Family life has been disrupted like you just never understood, because schools are schools, homes are homes, and offices are offices. You try and integrate them, and you end up with unintended consequences, right? So when we look at these things, mental health issues have started coming to the fore and all of those kind of things. Now, when you look at the World Economic Forum report, now that's the landscape that we spoke about a year ago, but just see how it's changed now. The landscape's very, very different now because we're now chatting about sustainability.
That's very interesting, and I mean, you're reminding me of the Edelman Trust Barometer and really looking at those results and how corporate trust has just completely gone out of the window, I think, with corporate governance failures that we've seen.
Exactly.
So then I suppose the next question, what is the top risk that you are currently dealing with? And when I say in your role, it'll be like, which role would that be? So maybe as the chairman of the King Committee or as a non-exec director, you sit on various boards, so whichever role you prefer to talk about. But how is it impacting in terms of achieving the strategy as well as the performance for those specific businesses that you have a leading role in?
So Nicola, let's start with this, that I'm very privileged, I must say, because I get to see this from different perspectives. From, I have different roles. So a role as a non-executive director gives me one perspective, and within that perspective, it's also different from company to company.
Exactly.
Right? Then I chair the United Nations World Food Programme, and that gives me a different perspective of what's happening on the social side. And then I chair the King Committee, where I see what's happening on the governance side. And each one has a different kind of implication. So when we're looking at just the main risks that I'm seeing from an non-executive director point of view, is business resilience is right up there. Cash flow management, that's the name of the game at the moment, because one can have a lot of things, other plans, but today it's about just keeping the business. Now, the key thing that I'm emphasizing on that is ethics. And you've got to have ethical leadership. I will often hear this comment saying, bread now, ethics later. I mean, that just doesn't cut ice. It doesn't cut ice. I don't think that's good. So that is a huge issue. Cash flow management, just making sure the organization remains resilient in the short, medium, and the long term. I think those are big things. So repositioning the organization, reinventing it. And resizing is really what the name of the game is at the moment. Supply chains are hugely an issue. So I think I'm seeing that, and I'll give you a practical example of that. Employee wellness is high on the agenda. We just dealt this morning with part of the business continuity process, an infectious disease management program policy. Because this is not the last that we're going to see. Because if you look at the World Economic Forum reports also, they're saying every 4.5 months there's going to be a new infection coming out, right? And we have to be prepared for those kind of things. So I chair, just on the NAID role, I'll give you an example. I chair an engineering services company. And we have the highest order book in the history of that company, right? But execution, supply chains are all blocked. A large number of our projects have now come to a halt. We've got a business in the US, and you just know what is happening with COVID in the US. Everything's come to. We've got a major mine that we're developing in another part of the world, reliant on supplies to come in. Nothing's happening because China's had lockdowns, and so. And all of that, if you're an engineering business, you get paid on the basis of work you do and something you erect. And if you can't erect that, there's just no money. So you can start seeing where it starts impacting. So as the chair in another role, if I look at the chair as chair of the UN World Food Programme, and I'm really, really pleased. I mean, we were awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace because food is the fundamental thing, because we're an emergency aid organization, right? And if people don't have food, you have revolution, you have wars, you have conflict, you have social unrest. So I think it's such an important element and we quite, in a way, honored that we've been given that award, purely because at this point in time, it raises the world's awareness that we could get funding, we can provide more funding. And so funding is a huge thing for us. To give you an indication of the extent of the issue, prior to COVID, we had 850 million people around the world that are food insecure. With COVID, it went up to 1.4 billion. Now, that's like on a population of about 7.3 billion, that's 1 in 5 people in this world are food insecure. That's not a sustainable
living on
world.
the breadline or under.
It's not a sustainable world. With that, we also have political crisis, leadership crises in countries. So we deliver food in the most remote parts of the world, right? And on what we call L3s. L3 is the most severe forms of hunger. And that is Syria, Yemen, northern Nigeria, DRC, and then we have all of these. So when we look at the number of L3s that have L2s and L3s, which are the serious ones, we have 17 around the world at the moment. Sure. Now, and then comes lockdown. You tell somebody in Bangladesh that you in lockdown, you can't go and work, and that person earns $2 a day. He doesn't think of the next day's food because he needs the $2 to survive today. Exactly. Now, could you imagine how serious the issue has become? And in that context, the risk that we're seeing is workforce planning, because we need more resources. These are emergency organizations. It's not as if you can just take anybody from any role and put them into this. You have a certain mindset, you have a certain level of training, and to kind of deal with that kind of mindset all of a sudden overnight is quite a challenge for the organization. We run a school feeding program, feeding 21 million school children every day. 7 days a week, because that's the only meal they get, right, in 65,000 schools around the world. So the logistics that involves, that's quite an issue, right? And how do we manage that with all lockdowns and all of that? But it also indicates the deep structural inequality that's around the world, if that's what people have to go through. Now, on the King Committee side, if I look at that role, you've spoken about corporate scandals. That has rocked us as a country. Our reputation, prior to 2015, just the World Economic Forum Competitiveness Report graded us #1 in the world in terms of corporate governance standards for 7 years. And after 2016, we've dropped lower and lower every year, right? And we published our King Committee report, the King Code, in November 16. So we've been monitoring what's happening in that space. So we've formed a scandals committee just to look at what are the learnings out of that. Is there something that we should be doing in terms of strengthening governance, the responsibilities of directors? The other area that has become very, very topical is executive pay. Again, because of structural inequality, that people are saying, well, if you look at the Gini coefficient of South Africa, it's the highest in the world, right? So these are deep, deep issues that somehow we've got to try and deal with. We formed a climate change committee to look at climate change, to sort of say, what do we do in this space? Is our guidance that we have currently in the King Code adequate, or should we be doing other things?
Sure, there's a lot in that conversation, and I think if I just reflect on your 1 in 5 people essentially live either on or below the breadline, as in they don't have a meal today and they don't know what they're going to eat, and the amazing work you guys are doing through the UN World Food Programme. I mean that structural inequality globally is just actually shocking. And so I suppose the next question is just which of the current risks that we've highlighted, so we've had about 12 risks that we've highlighted that are currently featuring in the 2021 IRMSA risk report for South Africa. Which ones resonate the most with you, maybe in your personal capacity, and maybe you want to share some personal insights and strategies?
I can relate to all of them. When you're dealing with governance, you have to deal with it end to end. So I can see and I can relate to every one of them. Having said that, I think there's certain ones that concern me more as we are. The recession, prolonged recession, right, really concerns me because, if we need economic growth, right, and if we're moving the other way, issues such as structural inequality become even worse, right, and that's kind of a huge challenge. As I said, disruption of supply chains are quite an issue for me. Corruption, obviously, that's just another tax on the poor. That's a pure tax on the poor, because the rich get away with everything, right? It's the poor that bear the suffering around corruption, and I think that really, and I'm quite pleased I saw that on the research listing. But structural inequality is the one that kind of is closest to my heart. business thrives where society thrives. And that's a basic. It's no rocket science around that. And where people can live with dignity. I think that's fundamental. Now, as we've seen over the past, I think, 10 or 15 years, the gap between rich and poor is getting wider and wider. And this is a worldwide issue. It's not only South Africa. And South Africa is even worse in that, because the Gini coefficient is just at the other extreme. And as I mentioned, when 1 in 5 people cannot even think about the next meal, or that's all they think about is the next meal, it can't be a sustainable society. We need a society that is hell-bent on economic growth and innovation. That's what we need, right? And if we have people that are stuck in poverty, that is just, they feel disenfranchised. And that's where the seeds of kind of unhappiness come through. And then after a while, it gets to a stage, we don't need to respect any institution, we don't need to do anything. We've had this, the fees must fall. Exactly the same kind of situation. So the circumstances are almost the same in every country. Because it's structural inequality that's there. And when young people are at their prime, when they leave school leaving or university leaving, they're looking for, it's the prime of their life. They really want to make a contribution. And imagine if they just don't have any employment. It just is not, it's not motivating to anyone. And it's anti-growth, it's anti-motivation, it's anti-society. So I think it's quite a huge, that one worries me out of all. It worries me tremendously. And I think we just need to move with that. Technological changes are a huge one. And I think that is where you say, where's opportunity? That's opportunity there. There's a lot of opportunity. We can use technology for education. We can really just the lockdown has shown us into new areas that we can go and see how we can deliver things, in terms of curriculum. You can do things very, very differently now. And these were all thoughts already in the making. But the reality is that it's all been accelerated, and COVID has just got us thinking about these things differently. So that's where the opportunity is. But having said that, it's also, criminals never go to sleep. So, then you've got all the cyber issues that we have to deal with. So I'm pleased that that's on your list of issues as well, of the risks that you see. Climate change, I think that's a big one. That's almost existential. If we don't get that right, we can talk about the next year and the year after, but longer term, where does that leave us? I don't think it leaves us in a very, very positive place. And, I think you just need to see what happened to Chernobyl, for example, overnight, where an entire society had to leave a town. And could you imagine if something happened like that and we have to leave Earth, where do we go?
Yeah, exactly. I suppose in the sort of medium term, my main concern is we've got such large pieces of land in Africa, and specifically in South Africa, that will become inarable land. And where do the people that currently live there migrate to? And I think I read about more than a quarter of the world's population lives at coastal regions. And so as the sea levels rise, where are they all going to live? So it's going to be some interesting times to see how we respond to climate change. But I suppose maybe let's turn it a bit more on the positive side, and maybe you can give me some valuable insights and more on the opportunity, the positive side, in terms of how the global pandemic has impacted the roles you've been in, and how the businesses that you engage with have potentially adjusted their strategy to leverage. And like you said, that some of them have really leapfrogged, specifically maybe on the technology side because of COVID. I look at us at the JSE and others in financial services. We've now been thinking about distributed workforce and a completely different model, which we hadn't been contemplating.
The one thing, again, and maybe it's a personal thing and philosophy that I have, I always believe that people matter most. You look at a country like Singapore, 60 years ago, they were a little fishing town.
They've done such amazing things.
What are they today? Because they used the human capital, in the best way. They may have other issues, but that's what they did. And to me, that's the biggest opportunity we have with COVID, that, it gets us to rethink how we can shape the whole social landscape at a broader level, at an organizational level, and that's, I think, where we can really think about accelerating things. I said education is a huge opportunity. Healthcare is a huge opportunity. I mean, technology is just a great benefit to us. I suppose some of the things that we also learn and have to do is to sort of think about supply chains and how reliant we are on certain supply chains. And you just say, and you take them for granted. You think that it's, it's there, so it's going to always operate. So, and I think, it's all of these things. If you look at climate change, in as much as it's a challenge, there's also a huge opportunity. New industries can come up. I mean, we just talk about geothermal, we talk about getting rid of fossil fuels, but we can build a whole new industry around it. And as South Africa, if you look at the kind of weather we have, I mean, we're perfect for it. I think on the governance side, I mean, it kind of worries me still where we are. And, it's that old saying, it takes you years to build a reputation and a lifetime to build a reputation, but you can lose it so quickly. And, I think that, and even the issue around structural inequality, I mean, there's so much we can do in that space. Structural inequality causes so many other issues. I mean, gender-based violence, drug abuse, just loss of self-esteem, all of those kind of things that are happening. There's so many things we can kind of deal with, and it's right. We have all the tools to do it. It just, we've got to have the will and the focus now to do it. And I think the one positive thing I've seen out of COVID is that people have got together.
Yeah, they've rallied around
they've
causes.
So there's a lot we can do. There's in every space that we look at, whether it's climate change, whether it's governance, or there's just, I think it's a new dawn. And that I say that we've been through the biggest lockdown ever. We've never had a lockdown, but now I think we can get into the greatest transformation that we've ever recorded. And we must just be prepared with that mind shift of saying we can, and there's lots we can do.
That's so inspiring. And I'm thinking about when you and I spoke off camera earlier, that you said you do some great mentorship work. You're an avid mountaineer and you go trekking, and you do that specifically to offer mentorship opportunity to children. So for me, it feels like the biggest opportunity, talking about the people element, is that we really just focus on how do we support the next generation? How do we create and cultivate the right culture that's aware of climate change, that builds an ethical leadership environment right from the start? And like you've said, I mean, you can just overnight completely lose the trust of your investors, your shareholder base, of all the investors looking at a country. But I think if I look at EOH as CEO, I think he's done really well in terms of just being open and honest about the issues, addressing them, and then saying, how do we move forward from there? So I suppose maybe it's just we have to take a long, hard look at ourselves, admit the corporate governance as well as the public sector failures, and move on from them and build on.
One has to draw a line in the sand somewhere, right? And, as long as nobody expects miracles, people can't expect that. That's just not real, right? But as long as you come up saying, there's transparency, there's proper accountability, and that's what you stand for, and good governance, ethical foundations, that's what people want, right? And you mentioned Edelman's. If you look at Edelman's research, that's exactly what they say. Organizations, that's what the stakeholders want, that walk your talk. If you say you're an ethical organization, walk that talk. That's all they ask. And everything follows through after that.
Exactly. Yeah, take accountability and admit what the wrongs of the past and change that. So the last question, it's been a really interesting conversation. I think probably is the trickiest one, is how would you characterize the South African geopolitical landscape, and what are the global themes that are impacting on us? You spoke a bit about it earlier. I was interested that you didn't mention the more nationalist approach. I think you did allude to it in some way or form. But it'll be interesting to hear how you think the sort of global geopolitical landscape will then impact us.
Well, I think we don't live in a cocoon. We live in a world, right? And, over the last 25 years, the world has just become a small village. So, everything. So, in as much as...
so interconnected.
And we may say that we have a unique issue, but go to any other country and you'll have the same issue, maybe to a different degree, but we all have similar issues. We all have poverty to deal with. We all have, climate change to deal with. We all have education to deal with. So the issues are very, very similar. So when we say the geopolitical situation in South Africa, I think we're just struggling globally with reputation where we are. Because if you looked at the early age, and just a clear reflection is our downgrades that we've been having.
Yeah.
Over time, we were doing pretty well. We were getting reasonable foreign, not the greatest because we were competing, but there were also other issues, right? Things like policy uncertainty. We literally chased people away by creating this uncertainty around certain policy areas. So we've got to deal with those kind of issues, and we need FDI. You know, if we get the FDI, and I know the state president last week, they were doing a lot to try and get this wheel rolling. But that's where we need, because globally, organizations, particularly corporates, have choices. They don't need to come to South Africa. You know, if they find a better location that's more business friendly, where corruption is low, that's what global business wants. So I think we kind of put ourselves into those kind of, you know, as they call it, scoring own goals. You know, that's kind of what we do. Our fiscus is weak, I mean, you know, because of everything that else has happened. And these are all negative taints that we see. You know, I mean, the PPE story is not a good one when the world looks at this, they're saying that, well, you know, we have a global pandemic, right? And, you know, pandemic like never, and yet we have this kind of behavior.
So maybe just on a last note, I mean, I've recently spoken to some international investors, and the thing that I quite enjoy about when you talk to an investor in the US or in the UK is they look at us and they say, South Africa is an emerging market, and they look and they compare us to other emerging markets, and they're saying, you know what, yes, okay, you have some corporate governance issues, you've got, like you've said, we unfortunately had some public sector failures, etc., and corruption is a challenge. But they said our country's still doing pretty well, and there's still some great opportunities here. There's some great businesses here. Yes, our investment grade is lower, etc. But they expect that of an emerging market, and they have given us some more opportunity to grow. We've still got time. We've still we can still turn the story around. So,
but Nicola, I suppose, you know, it's a question of where your mindset is, because if your level is one of excellence, then comparing yourself to somebody else that's not in that kind of position doesn't, you know, it's not the comparison we want. We want to be rated as a safe investment destination with no corruption, where people can have, you know, be business friendly, and that's what we should be benchmarking ourselves. You know, it's if you get 5 bad people and you benchmark yourself against 5 and you're the best of the 5. That doesn't, it's cold comfort. You know, I think you need to strive for something. And you know, that's where I gave the example of Singapore. No natural resources, very tiny country, small population, but look what they've done. With all the natural resources we have huge human capital potential here, right? We have all the natural resources that one could wish for. You know, for generations to come, and we're not using it in the right way, and we're not messaging it properly to the rest of the world, and it's all with policy uncertainty and all the other things, the risks we mentioned. But I don't think we must ever be so negative about it, because, you know, the human spirit mustn't be dampened, because the very fact that we've had COVID and in a matter of 18 months or a short space of time we're coming up with a vaccine just shows what innovation can do and what the human spirit is about. So we should never succeed, we should never surrender, we should strive for excellence.
Definitely. Cool. Thank you so much. That's been so interesting and inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me.
So thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation, Suresh, and just reflecting on all the really insightful topics we covered, talking about structural inequality, and for all of us to take action and prioritize people. So we're talking about the triple Ps, people, planet, and profit, but really changing that profit, and profit just becomes the outcome. And let's rather talk about people, planet, and purpose, and make sure that we're all clear about our purpose, we're all clear about those priorities and all those major risks that we faced, but that we can turn that around and make sure that we work in an environment that is friendly towards our people, that takes care of our planet, and we're all clear on the purpose that we're wanting to achieve. Thank you so much for your time. It's really been very insightful.
Thank you very much, and thanks once again for IRMSA in supporting the King Committee.
Thank you. you.